Welcome back to Squawk Time now for the Executive Edge. Eunice Yoon joins us with a closer look at what's going on in Beijing in terms of the crackdown there on some big tech names like Alibaba and Tencent. Good morning or good evening to you, Eunice.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. Well, big tech is bracing for big changes. Ever since Ant's IPO was pulled, the government here has been signaling that it's just going to ramp up its effort to go after monopolies. China's premier last week at the National People's Congress said that the country was going to root out anti-competitive behavior in 2021. And just today, the market regulator also said that Beijing would roll out more rules this year to tighten oversight of online companies. So the expectation is that Beijing really wants to put itself at the heart of the industry to be able to regulate tech, but also to make sure that companies, for example, work together with sharing data so that the country can finally realize one of its own dreams, which is to create a credit scoring system, or, for example, for Beijing to put a whole lot more money into new technologies. The expectation is that that state-run private equity companies or PE funds are going to be putting a lot of money into some of these new ITs. Now, another expectation for big changes is that those big tech names are going to see a lot slower growth. Ant, for example, is going to be regulated like a bank. And not only would that cut off and some of the more lucrative financial services that Ant has been offering, but also some of the merchants that work with Ant are probably going to have less access to capital. So overall, people are expecting that there's going to be slower growth. Now, finally, the expectation here is that Beijing is going to cast a wider net. So we already saw the impact of some of these announcements on Friday as well as today in Tencent stock. Tencent stock fell because its business in FinTech, which is seen as worth about $100 billion or so, is very similar to Alibaba's and Alipay. It's not as popular, but it's still there. So the expectation is that Tencent now is going to see its FinTech business regulated in the same way. And also on Friday, people were talking a lot about how Beijing fined 12 companies. These were all major tech names. You would know them all. Alibaba, Didi, ByteDance, Tencent, Baidu are just some of them. And the fines by this antitrust regulator weren't very large, but it was sort of seen as a way to remind all these big tech companies of who's boss. Andrew?
Hey, Eunice, is there any conversation, and we've talked about this a little bit among ourselves now, about these Chinese companies in relation to U.S. companies, the size and scale? Because I have to imagine that if you're Mark Zuckerberg today, or if you're Google or any of the big tech companies, this is actually not good news for you, oddly enough, because you're seeing in the Biden administration, Tim Wu just joining that administration. He's a trust buster, if you will. There's a whole number of other people that are joining that administration. And then if they're going to get tough in China, it takes away that argument that Mark Zuckerberg and others have used historically, which is, you know what? Don't regulate us, because if you do, we're not going to be able to compete with China. But if China is going to regulate themselves, it makes it easier in a way for the folks in the U.S. to regulate as well. Is there any conversation about that?
There's conversation about it, but not in the same vein. So I think people here aren't necessarily worried about the prospects for Facebook and what's going to happen with Mark Zuckerberg. But people are looking at it saying that in the U.S. and in Europe, too, that you see the government's very wary about big tech, and that's very similar to what we're seeing in China. However, the difference between China and the U.S. is that Mark Zuckerberg will have his day in court. Whereas here in China, people don't necessarily think they're going to get their day in court. And that at the end of the day, it's whatever Beijing wants. And there's a lot of mystery about how and when these decisions are made.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.